4,500 years ago, humans stacked 2.5 million stones into a mountain. No cranes, no trucks, no engines, no wheels worth mentioning. Just people, rope, and stone. The Great Pyramid of Giza still stands today, sharp against the desert sky. For nearly 4,000 years, it was the tallest building anywhere on Earth. Some blocks weigh as much as a car. A few weigh more than an elephant. So people look up at it and whisper the same question. How? It seems impossible. Impossible enough that some say aliens must have done it for us. But there were no aliens. There were farmers, bakers, and a very clever plan. This is the real story of how ancient people built the pyramids, step by step. And by the end, you will see exactly how humans pulled it off. Let's start with the sheer scale, because the numbers are genuinely hard to believe. The Great Pyramid is built from roughly 2.3 million separate blocks of stone. Each block weighs about 2.5 tons, heavier than most modern cars. Stack them, and the pyramid rises about 147 meters into the air. That is taller than a 40-story skyscraper, made entirely of hand-cut rock. Its base covers 13 acres, wide enough to fit several football fields inside, and the whole thing was finished in around 20 years. Do the math. That means setting a heavy block into place every few minutes, for 2 decades straight. So how do you even begin a project that enormous? You start with a king. His name was Khufu, Pharaoh of Egypt, around 2560 B.C. To the Egyptians, the pharaoh was a living god who would rule even after death. His tomb had to be worthy of a god, so he ordered a mountain of stone. But a king cannot lift a single block himself. He needs an army of workers. And here is the first myth we can throw away. They were not slaves. For centuries, people pictured whipped slaves dragging stones under a cruel sun. That is wrong. Archaeologists found the workers' town right beside the pyramids, and it tells a different story. They found bakeries, breweries, and huge amounts of cattle and fish bones. These workers were fed bread, beer, and meat, a rich diet for the time. They found workers' tombs too, built with honor right next to their god-king. Slaves would never be buried in a place of honor beside the pharaoh. Many were skilled builders. Others were farmers, working the pyramid while the Nile flooded their fields. Each year, the river swelled and covered the farmland for months on end. With no crops to tend, thousands of farmers were free to join the great project. They came in rotating crews, organized into teams with proud names painted on the stones. Names like the Friends of Khufu and the Drunkards of Menkaure. They had spirit, so we have our workforce. Now they need stone, and lots of it. Most of the pyramid is limestone, and luckily, it was hiding right under their feet. A limestone quarry sat just a few hundred meters from the building site. That is no accident. They chose the location partly because the rock was already there. To cut a block, a worker first marked a rough rectangle on the stone floor. Then, using copper chisels and stone hammers, they carved channels around each block. Copper is soft, so the tools wore down fast and had to be resharpened constantly. Teams of coppersmiths worked all day just to keep the chisels sharp enough to bite. Once the sides were cut, workers drove wooden wedges into a line of slots beneath the block. They soaked the wooden wedges in water, and the wood slowly swelled with a mighty force. That swelling pressure cracked the stone cleanly away from the bedrock. Simple, patient, brilliant. Now imagine doing that over 2 million times. The patience is almost unimaginable. But limestone was the easy part. Inside the pyramid sits something far tougher: granite. The king's burial chamber is lined with massive granite beams, hard as steel. Copper tools barely scratch granite. So, how did they cut the hardest stone of all? The answer is a rock even harder than granite, called dolerite. Workers took heavy dolerite balls and pounded the granite, hour after hour, crushing it to dust. To carve straight channels, they dragged copper saws back and forth across the surface. The trick was the sand. They fed wet quartz sand under the saw as it moved. The hard sand grains did the cutting, slowly grinding a slot into the granite. To drill holes, they spun copper tubes with sand, boring perfect circles into solid rock. It was painfully slow, but it worked. Sweat and sand beat the hardest stone on Earth. The heaviest granite blocks came from Aswan, 500 miles up the Nile. Some of those beams weigh 50 to 80 tons, as heavy as a blue whale. Which raises the next impossible question. How do you move a stone that big? For the giant granite, the answer was the river itself, Egypt's greatest highway. Workers loaded the enormous blocks onto wooden barges at the quarry's edge. The Nile's current carried the barges gently downstream toward Giza. But the pyramid sits out in the desert, away from the river's banks. So the Egyptians dug canals and a harbor to float the stone almost to the site. We know this because an ancient diary of a work crew was recently discovered. An overseer named Mira wrote about shipping limestone by boat to Khufu's pyramid. It is the oldest written record we have, written by a man who was actually there. Once ashore, though, the boats could go no further. Now came the hard part, dragging millions of blocks across sand and up to the pyramid by muscle alone. They placed each block on a heavy wooden sledge, like a giant sled with runners. Teams of men tied thick ropes to the sledge and heaved together on command. But dragging a loaded sledge across dry sand is brutal. The sand piles up and fights you. So the Egyptians discovered a beautifully simple trick, and we can prove they used it. A man walked in front of the sledge, pouring water onto the sand ahead. Just the right amount of water makes wet sand firm and slick, not muddy. Scientists tested this, and the right dampness cuts the pulling force roughly in half. Suddenly, a team half the size could drag the very same stone. Water was their machine. And here is the proof. A painting in an ancient tomb shows exactly this. A huge statue rides a sledge, while a man out front pours water on the ground. For centuries, people thought he was just performing a ritual. He was doing physics. With wet sand under the runners, the blocks slid steadily toward the growing pyramid. Crews chanted together to time every pull, hundreds of feet moving as one. A steady rhythm of heave and slide, all day long. But sliding a block along flat ground is one thing. Now it must go up. The pyramid climbs higher every day, and each block has to be lifted to the top. There are no cranes, no pulleys strong enough, no machines. So, how do they rise? This is the greatest mystery of all, and even experts still argue about it today. But they agree on the core idea. The Egyptians built ramps of earth and rubble. A ramp turns an impossible lift into a long, gentle, draggable slope. Instead of hauling a block straight up, you drag it up a hill. Much easier. The real question is what shape the ramps actually took. Here are the leading ideas. The first is a single straight ramp, climbing up one face of the pyramid. It works, but to stay gentle near the top, it would grow absurdly long and huge. So huge it might need more material than the pyramid itself. Probably not the full answer. The second idea is a ramp that spirals up around the outside of the pyramid. It uses far less material, but the sharp corners make turning big sledges very tricky. And it would hide the edges the builders needed to check for a perfect shape. The third idea is the boldest, a ramp hidden inside the pyramid itself. In this theory, a straight ramp raises the lowest, heaviest third of the blocks. Then the builders switch to a corkscrew tunnel, spiraling up inside the walls. Workers would haul blocks through this inner passage, turning the corners by hand. Strange gaps found inside the Great Pyramid might just be the remains of that tunnel. The honest truth is we still don't know for certain which method they used. It may even have been a clever combination of several ramps at once. What we do know is that ramps, muscle, and patience got the stones up there. To help, workers used simple wooden levers to nudge and tip blocks into place. A long pole under a stone lets one man lift a corner that seems immovable. They would lever a block up, slide a support under it, and lever again, rising bit by bit. Near the very top, the pyramid narrows, and there is little room to work. The blocks up here are smaller, but the height makes every move slow and dangerous. Men balanced on the narrow steps, guiding each stone with ropes and steady hands. Below them, the desert stretched out, and the whole of Egypt seemed to watch. Now, moving stones is only half the challenge. The other half is precision, because the Great Pyramid is not just big, it is astonishingly, unbelievably accurate. Its base is almost perfectly level, off by only about 2 centimeters across its width. How do you level ground that wide without a single modern instrument? One leading idea is water. Water always settles perfectly flat, so it never lies. They may have cut channels, filled them with water, and marked one true level line. then chiseled the whole rocky base down to match that line, dead flat. Even more amazing, the four sides line up almost exactly with north, south, east, and west. They had no compass, so they looked up at the night sky for their answer. By watching the stars circle a fixed point, they found true north with stunning accuracy. An ancient people, with ropes and starlight, aligned a mountain to the poles of the earth. To keep the walls rising at the perfect angle, they used simple tools of genius. A plumb line, just a string and a weight, showed them a perfectly vertical drop. A set square and a level made of wood kept every corner honest. With these humble tools, they held the same precise slope across millions of blocks. As the structure grew, the rough core blocks were locked tightly into their stepped shape. But a stepped, rocky pyramid was not the final vision. It had to shine, so they covered the whole thing in a smooth outer skin of fine white limestone. These casing stones were cut and polished to fit together with razor-thin joints. The gaps are so tight you can barely slide a knife blade between the stones. Workers set the casing from the top down, smoothing the steps into flat, gleaming sides. When it was done, the pyramid was not sandy brown. It was blindingly, brilliantly white. Under the Egyptian sun, it would have flashed like a beacon visible for miles. At the very peak sat a capstone, possibly covered in gold or shining electrum. Imagine that golden tip catching the first light of dawn over the desert. Over the ages, most of that smooth white casing was stripped away for other buildings. That is why the pyramid looks stepped and bare today. We see its rough skeleton, but picture it new. A perfect, gleaming white mountain, crowned in gold, brand new. It was the tallest thing humans would build for the next 3,800 years. Every stone was quarried, moved, lifted, and set by human hands and human minds. No aliens, no magic. Just ramps, ropes, water, copper, and relentless organized effort. Tens of thousands of ordinary people working together toward one staggering goal. And they left it standing for us, a message across 4,500 years. The message is simple. Look what people can do when they build together. The next time someone says the pyramids are impossible, you will know better. They were not built by gods or aliens, but by us. And that is the wonder of it. Because the greatest thing the ancient Egyptians built was proof of what humans can do.